Okay. I know most of you already know and admire Dan Dennett, but after listening to his bio that I'm going to read to you, you'll understand why I was so impressed to be collaborating with him. Now, Professor Daniel Dennett, one of the four horsemen of the New Atheism and co-director of the Center for Cognitive Studies at Tufts University, he's an honorary FFRF director. He received FFRF's Emperor Has No Clothes Award in 2005. He received the Erasmus Prize in 2012 in Amsterdam. It's the highest award that's given in the Netherlands. And he received the American Humanist of the Year Award in 2004. Now, he'll be signing copies of Breaking the Spell, Religious as a Natural Phenomenon. Other books include Darwin's Dangerous Idea, Consciousness Explained, and the soon-to-be-released From Bacteria to Bach and Back, The Evolution of Mind. He received 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, a Fulbright Fellowship, a fellowship at the Center of Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science. As you've already heard, he's co-founder of the Clergy Project, and he and I co-authored Caught in the Pulpit, Leaving Belief Behind. And when I meet people who know that we've worked together, they look at me with wonderment and they ask, what's it like to work with Dan Dennett? And I say what's true and what they're hoping to hear. I say it's wonderful. Many people have seen him on YouTube or read some of his books or essays, and they get a correct sense that he's not only brilliant, but he's warm and folksy. Not only intellectual, but he has a great sense of humor and is decent and kind. His talk tonight is titled, Has the Dam Broken? Omen and Worries. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to you my colleague, Daniel C. Dennett. Where are you, Dan?
Well, thank you all. Well, there's some hard acts to follow, the satanic invocation, and then the wonderful songs that we've just heard. And so I thought I would start by sharing something that many of you have probably seen or heard about, and its relevance will be clear as I go on. Now, let's see if I can make this go. There we go. That was 1957 on Panorama, which was sort of like 60 Minutes, and Richard Dimbleby was that most august figure of the BBC, the man, the voice who quietly and respectfully intoned all the details of the coronation and other great state events. So he was a man of tremendous credibility, and yet he dared to put on this April Fool's joke, which was so successful that the next day, travel agents in the UK were inundated with requests from people who wanted to fly off to the spaghetti harvest while it was still going on. So that was 60 years ago. 10 years ago, a number of us, Richard Dawkins and I and Sam Harris and late Christopher Hitchens, all got into the act by writing books that later became called the Books of the Four Horsemen. And we were all responding to the same thing, what you might call the theocratic rumble that we heard in this land. And I wonder if you remember how scary that was. It was really quite unlike today. I remember when Breaking the Spell came out, there were presumably smart, knowledgeable, savvy people in New York and West Coast and elsewhere who advised me that I was going to have to get an unlisted phone number, have bodyguards wear a bulletproof vest. And I didn't know they were wrong. They were. The rising theocratic surge was much more of a paper tiger than we realized, but that's the way it felt back then. The outrageous arrogance and effrontery with which they proceeded, well, what they did is they overplayed their hand. If they had just been a little bit more modest and calm, I at least would probably not have dropped everything and decided I had to do something about it, and would have stayed with my other projects, to which I am now pretty much returning. The reason I mention this is I want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake. There's a lot of good news, and we've heard it from various people. I won't spend much time on this because we've already heard a lot of the good news from the Public Religion Research Institute. I don't know if you can see that. No, it's too bad. Well, it's a graph that shows the rising percentage of the unaligned, which has gone up from about 5%, up to about 30% in recent years. And another chart, which is in some ways even more heartening, which shows the age distribution. How many young people say that they are entirely unaffiliated, and the percentages of young people going up and up and up. So that's good news, and the FFRF has had a big role to play in fostering those developments. But freedom from religion is not the only freedom in need of defense today. A question that has been occupying me of late is, should we have a daughter foundation, the FFFF, the Freedom from Fascism Foundation? I think we have to take seriously the idea that it's not just religion. We shouldn't think that all of the problems are to be laid at the door of various religions. There are plenty of non-religious fascists out there as well, and their power, I am sad to say, is growing. The religious right is fragmenting in any case. It's losing market share, and it's morphing into some new configurations. Example, in June, quoting from Pew, fully 78% of white evangelical voters say they would vote for Trump if the election were held today, including about a third who strongly back his campaign. That was in June. This last Thursday, I read in the paper that a group of nearly 80 evangelical leaders published a letter condemning Trump. But will their congregations listen to them? And if they do, will they believe what they hear? That was Thursday. I think maybe today they will believe what they hear. Events have a way of catching up with you even when you're writing your talk at the last minute. What I want to talk about tonight is a longer range worry and a few reflections on the circumstances that produce it. A philosopher whom I much admire and have been friends with for 40 years, I guess, is Philip Kitcher. He's at Columbia. And a book has just been published from Oxford University Press called The Philosophy of Philip Kitcher. It's a bunch of essays about his work with responses from him. And I have a piece in it called What to Do While Religions Evolve Before Our Very Eyes. Philip is what Jerry Coyne would call a faiththeist. I'm an atheist, but. Well, he is an atheist, but he has more than a soft spot for religion and wants to argue for preserving it, fostering it, helping it through difficult times. He claims to be on the same page as me and you. We all want to see religion, let us say, evaporate, if not in our lifetimes, then in the lifetimes of our children or grandchildren. He is quite clear that that is his goal too, and he's a good atheist. But he's very concerned with how we get there. I share his concern, and I have to say, I think there is a case to be made for his side of it. In my essay about it, I say what we're really doing here is, it's like the question of how do you pull off a Band-Aid. He's very, very gently and slowly and gently and slowly and gently and slowly. And I say, rip it off, get it done, and then we can go on with our lives. And I don't think it's obvious what the right answer is, but I do say he hasn't convinced me. In a way, I wish he were here to rebut what I'm going to say now, but you can find his response to me in that book if you want to see. Now, what he introduces is a distinction between what he calls the belief model and the orientation model of religion. The belief model is the traditional model where your beliefs are the core of your religion. The orientation model says, no, it's the community, the alliance, the loyalty, the ritual traditions, that should be the core. Beliefs, creed, that's a negligible or jettisonable or ignorable or adjustable part of religion. And as you can imagine, he wants to recommend to us all the orientation model because he thinks the belief model is simply indefensible because he's a good atheist. If you take it literally, it's nonsense. So what does he have to say about the orientation model? And those of us who have friends or family, aunts and uncles or grandparents or parents who are very loyal to their churches and want to stay with them, and you are reluctant to bring dismay and embarrassment and maybe pain into their lives by challenging them on their creed, might well want to consider whether this orientation model is a more humane, gentle, and diplomatic way of going. Well, the orientation model, he says, presents us all with a spectrum of possible views, which he has some curious names for. It goes from the mythically self-conscious through doctrinal indefiniteness to doctrinal entanglement. Well, what does that mean? Well, the mythically self-conscious, these are people who say, it's myth, it's metaphor, it's just myth. They are self-conscious about the fact that they are putting their allegiance behind a myth. This is not unlike such organizations as the Baker Street Irregulars, who don't quite worship Sherlock Holmes, but pride themselves in knowing the details of all the Sherlock Holmes stories, and they have meetings and scholarly papers, and they celebrate Sherlock Holmes. Now, they know he's not a real character. They know he's a fictional character, but they just love him as a fictional character. And if there was a Perry Mason group or something like that to stand in opposition to them, they would shun the Perry Masonites as they continued. But this is all mythic, self-consciously myth-loving. Doctrinal indefiniteness is that convenient fog that settles in over creeds and permits one to respond to questions with mumble, 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 which leads, if pressed, to doctrinal entanglement, where one, in response to probing or just one's own curiosity, ventures some faint or growing entanglement with the doctrines of the belief model. Well, now, Philip is a very astute presenter of this spectrum or his panoply of options, but he does have a problem. He really can't talk about it in public. That is, he can write a book about it, but it's not the sort of thing that you can talk about in the sort of wider public, because you can't speak candidly because of the poisonous effects it might have. You can't go into the church and say, all right, congregation, what shall we vote for? Shall we be doctrinally indefinite, or are we in for some mythic self-consciousness, or maybe even a little entanglement? The very self-consciousness, the very reflection on these options is something which has to be kept backstage. He can't be candid about it. And that, I submit, puts him in a very awkward position, and it really sort of puts us all in an awkward position. In fact, you can, of course, talk about it. That's what I'm doing right now. But this deflects us from what matters: truth. The very idea of insisting on telling the truth and presuming others to tell the truth, is put in jeopardy by the normalization of policies of the sort that Kitcher is recommending. And by the way, PRRI notes, they're the ones that did the survey about the unaffiliated, found that the most common reason people gave for their lack of religious affiliation was a disbelief in religion's teachings. So that if the religion manages to fuzz over the boundaries of its doctrines sufficiently, this may keep people from leaving the church, which will actually delay further the end result that Kitcher himself says he wants, which is the gradual evaporation of religion. This is prolonging a moribund tradition by creative obfuscation instead of insisting on telling the truth. And here, I want to draw attention to a wonderful remark that was made yesterday by Carter Warden, that is, Adam. He said, "I didn't lose my faith, I chose to discard it." I think we should take that distinction very seriously and recognize that if we're going to give people the opportunity to make the choice, the informed choice that Carter made, we should resist importunings that we go along with doctrinal indefiniteness and other foggy obfuscations of that sort. Now, how does this come about? I think what we're facing today is a sort of credibility vacuum. And people are losing track of the importance of, to put it bluntly, meaning what you say. Now, this is not a new problem. It's actually very old, and I want to discuss what several other philosophers have had to say about this very issue. And I'm going to start with, I guess, my favorite philosopher of all, David Hume. My colleague, Dennis Rasmussen, in a forthcoming book, The Infidel and the Professor, The Friendship and Philosophy of David Hume and Adam Smith, tells the following tale. In 1764, a friend asked Hume for advice about the case of a young clergyman whose religious beliefs were wavering and who was deliberating about whether to give up his orders. Hume counseled him not to, given that reliable occupations were so difficult to come by for men of letters. As for the young man's scruples, Hume acidly responded, "It is putting too great a respect on the vulgar and on their superstitions to pique oneself on sincerity with regard to them. Did ever one make it a point of honor to speak truth to children or madmen?" And he goes on, "I wish it were in my power to be a hypocrite in this particular. The common duties of society usually require it, and the ecclesiastical profession only adds a little more to an innocent dissimulation, or rather simulation, without which it is impossible to pass through the world." As usual, Hume is a master writer, but I think Hume was dissimulating here. This was not in a published paper. This was in a letter to a friend to pass on to this poor young man who had taken holy orders. And I think that Hume didn't mean it. And I think what he was doing was creating a useful crutch, exaggerating the triviality of saying a few words so that the young man could not only continue with his post, but do so with a relatively clear conscience. I think Hume, I'd like to think, I have no insight into Hume's particular thinking on this score, but he was in fact a very generous-minded and sensitive man, and I like to think that he felt for the young man and contrived a way of giving him a counter-illusion to salve his conscience as he continued espousing the illusion that he was being paid for. So that's Hume dissimulating. Richard Dawkins, in his recent second volume of his autobiography, tells a story about New College, the college where he has been a fellow for many years. As you can see from the picture, it's a very ecclesiastical place. It has a fabulous chapel. It has a world-famous choir and many very distinguished academics. It is one of the jewels of Oxford. And in the book, Dawkins tells about one of his duties when he was sub-warden, and that was saying grace at some meals. What should he do? There were people who objected, said it was hypocritical of him to do this, and he said no, he didn't. He thought he could do it all right. The question I want to raise is, where today should we draw the line between, as he puts it, a matter of simple courtesy like removing your shoes when entering a Hindu or Buddhist temple, and capitulation into hypocrisy? So I want to do a little experiment. He, in his book, quotes his colleague, A.J. Ayer, the philosopher who was also the professor of logic in New College, and by the way, one of my thesis examiners. And Ayer's defense for saying grace, Ayer, the famous atheist and logical positivist, Ayer's defense was, I will not utter falsehoods, but have no objections to making meaningless statements. I think Ayer was dissimulating here too. Especially if you know any philosophy, and if you've ever read Language, Truth, and Logic by Ayer, you know he had lots of objections to uttering meaningless statements. That's the whole point of the book. Much more honest to utter falsehoods that might be corrected than to utter meaningless statements. But it passed for a while and got him over the embarrassment of saying grace. So what was the new college grace? It's very simple. Benedictus benedicat. How many of you, just in the spirit of going along, will now repeat after me, Benedictus benedicat? How many of you refuse to do that? Okay, so I thought there might be a little bit of refusal. You say that at the beginning of the meal, and then at the end of the meal you say Benedicto benedicatur. Benedicto benedicatur. All right. Yeah. Now, let's translate those into English and see if you really want to say them. Maybe you do. May the Blessed One bless us. May the Blessed One bless us. Are you happy with that? No. Anybody? No. Let us bless the Blessed One. That's interesting, isn't it? Well, now, you'll say it in Latin, but you won't say it in English. Isn't that, some of you will say it in Latin, isn't that a sort of fetishistic response? I mean, are you superstitious or something? Of course, now you know what it means in English, you're less likely to say it. But just to show you that this is on a sliding scale, I want to try one more and see how many of you will go along with this. Are you ready? Allahu Akbar. Really? Really? It's not just Allah is great, but Allah is greater. Greater than your government, greater than your God, greater. Are you comfortable saying Allahu Akbar? No. Neither, by the way, is Richard. I asked him, and he said no, he would not say. He would say Benedictus benedicat, but he would not say Allahu Akbar because of his view of the difference between Islam and at least the kind of Christianity exemplified by the Church of England in New College, which is, of course, about as vitiated and watered down religion as you could possibly have. Church of England, or as the joke goes, somebody says, "Are you religious?" "No, we're C of E." But the reason I raise these is that I want to talk about the problem that they raise, the problem with formulae of this sort, and our reluctance to saying them. I submit that our reluctance to saying them is not because we have any superstitious ideas about blasphemy or anything like that. It's that once they've become sacred to some group of people, we know that saying them without meaning them is going to be offensive to some people or seem to give support. And so the formula itself becomes an object of attention that people can become very exercised over and even fight over and even, in the end, kill over. And I want to know how this happens. And first of all, let me say I don't know. But I have an idea, which I've presented before, and I'm going to run it by you again, see what you think of it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. Stephen Jay Gould's book, Wonderful Life. Gould has been mentioned before by Jerry Coyne, and I think somebody else. This is a rather different Gould. This is Wonderful Life is Gould's book about the Cambrian explosion, the incredible blossoming of new life forms about 350 odd million years ago, can be nicely seen in this, my favorite tree of life. Let's see, right there, this whole time goes from here to here. This is the present, out around here. This is the beginning of life, and life continues on for about a billion years plus, more than that, 2 billion years really, until suddenly we have the famous eukaryotic revolution, the endosymbiotic origin of the eukaryotic cell, and suddenly, by evolutionary standards, over a few million years, we get this tremendous outpouring of novel forms, unlike anything, most of them that we see today. There's a lot of wonderful artist drawings of the amazing different life forms that flourished, briefly, but sometimes for, I suppose, a few million years, in response to this explosion that happened. Not for nothing is one of these critters called hallucigenia. Well, what triggered the Cambrian explosion? Nobody knows. There are different theories. One that I want to introduce to you, if you haven't heard about it before, is one that was developed by the Oxford zoologist Andrew Parker and presented in his 2003 book, In the Blink of an Eye. He argues that the main trigger of all of this tremendous creative design, evolutionary design work that happened was in response to the ocean, the shallow ocean, becoming, chemically, for various reasons, more transparent. Light could get through, and whereas there hadn't been any eyesight, eyes evolved very quickly, and as soon as they evolved, this set off an incredible arms race of invention and counter-invention, new methods of locomotion, methods of hiding and seeking, predator-prey interactions, camouflage, evasive behavior, and that the driving force of all of this was the sudden transparency of the medium in which life then existed, permitting long-distance perception and making locomotion a much more potent tool, because before everything was, you had very little chance of seeing into the future because your sense organs pretty much simply told you what was happening at your surface, and you're sort of groping around in the mud. So, as I say, Parker's theory is not known to be right or wrong. He's had to adjust it to respond to some objections. I'm not saying we should accept it, but I am saying let's use it as a hypothesis on which we can model another hypothesis which might be right even if Parker isn't. So if the Cambrian explosion was triggered by the old transparency, we're now inaugurating the era of the new transparency. Not just the internet, it's cell phones and television, it's what's happened in the last really 50 years. And the hypothesis is that it's going to be even more tumultuous and at a much faster pace than the scramble, the chaotic scramble to avoid extinction that faced all life forms when the Cambrian explosion happened. I got together with the computer scientist Deb Roy. He has a wonderful TED Talk, which I hope you will see, about the language project he did with his son. And he and I, together in Scientific American in March of last year, published a piece called Our Transparent Future. No secret is safe in the digital age. The implications for our future are downright Darwinian. That is not our title, that's Scientific American's title. Newspapers and magazines reserve the right to put titles on pieces, and not much you can do about it. At least not much I can do about it. But at any rate, this new transparency. So the idea is that the great change in our world, triggered by the media inundation, can be summed up in a single word: transparency. We all can see farther, faster, cheaper, easier than ever before, and we can be seen. And this makes a tremendous difference. The epistemological murk of pre-scientific civilization is being replaced by transparency. All the institutions that have developed in civilization, all, not just churches, but governments, armies, banks, industries, clubs, families, corporations, all human groups with projects up till now have evolved in a relatively epistemologically murky environment. It's been easy to keep secrets. And suddenly, it's very hard to keep secrets. We seem to be living in a post-secret age. Now, some people think this is wonderful, and politicians love to talk about transparency. Barack Obama pledged a more transparent presidency. But we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that that's a good thing. In fact, as anybody who knows any game theory will tell you, you absolutely do not want to reveal your plans if you are in any sort of a competitive situation. You have to keep your counsel, you have to keep your own plans and intentions secret. You cannot be an effective agent unless you have a non-transparent boundary within which you can conduct your planning and your moves in the world. Well, now this transparency that's coming is in many regards a good thing, and I don't want to say it isn't. It's a very good thing. I like to quote A.J. Johnson, who said, "The internet is the best thing to happen to atheism since Darwin." Why? Because atheists, African American or otherwise, know that we're not alone, which nicely brings up the mutual knowledge aspect. Very important that not just that I know you're an atheist and you know I'm an atheist, but I know that you know that I'm an atheist and you know that I know that I'm an atheist, and so forth. And this mutual knowledge is actually very important, and it is made possible by the new transparency. And it gives us a sort of recursive hall of mirrors. In 1975, let's say, there were many thousands of people who knew of a priest who had sexually abused a child. But almost no one knew that. Today, hundreds of millions of people know that hundreds of millions of people know that thousands of priests have sexually abused children. It's that mutual knowledge, the fact that people not only know it, but they know that others know it. And those others know that others know it. And this changes the whole world of those agents in that setting. This is why the Catholic Church is now having a very hard time recruiting priests. Young men have to add to their concerns the likelihood that a lot of people are going to view them with suspicion if they enter the priesthood, simply because of the common mutual knowledge of all of that abuse. The Archbishop of Minnesota This is a headline in the Boston Globe of a couple of years ago, where he denies touching a minor. I want you to look closely at the statement that he gave to the press. Nienstedt said he normally stands for these photos with one hand on his staff and the other hand either on the right shoulder of the newly confirmed person or on a stole that hangs from his chest. I do that deliberately, and there are hundreds of photographs to verify that fact, he wrote. Can you imagine a priest writing that sentence for public consumption 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? No. And the mere fact that he protests in this way shows how profoundly the church has been affected by the transparency that it is now engulfed in. Well, in the Cambrian explosion, most of the exotic forms went extinct. Of course, they didn't all. Every non-plant, non-fungus that's alive today is really descended from the creatures that were alive today, so they didn't all go extinct. Which organizations will go extinct? The mutual knowledge changes the epistemological environment in which all organizations must survive, not just churches, governments, armies, corporations, clubs, as I said. Here's a arresting fact. In Ireland a generation ago, there were 3 priests for every parish. Today, there are 3 parishes for every priest. That's about a 10-fold decline, and most of the priests are old. Now, we may applaud the transparency and think that all the institutions that have thrived in the darkness and because of the darkness will go extinct, and good riddance to them. But it may be a bad thing. When we move from epistemological murkiness into transparency, where there are no trusted authorities, there's no pope, there's no king, there's also no Walter Cronkite and no Richard Dimbleby. The reason I showed that wonderful joke of his, that prank, is to suggest that who could do that today? I don't think there's anybody that could do that. A lot of people who could carry it off, but it wouldn't have the impact. And it wouldn't have the impact because nobody has the credibility, the authority to be accepted by most everybody. Mutual knowledge does not endow, I think, anybody on the planet with that sort of reliability today. And what we have, moreover, is a sort of reputation arms race. What organizations and individuals are beginning to realize is it doesn't matter how good a job you do, if somebody else decides to destroy your reputation for credibility, all your good fact gathering and evidence gathering may go for naught. As usual in arms races, offense is cheaper to design and develop than defense. And to my knowledge, nobody has yet developed a defense against malicious reputation challenges. And that's a very frightening prospect. Notice that science as a whole is probably our best, strongest candidate. That's, to me, echoing what Jerry Coyne had to say earlier, one of the best reasons to get behind science and to announce our support, but don't go overboard. Don't make the mistake, if you like, of worshiping science, but respect science for what it does respectably. And to those who are critical of science, I love to point out to them particularly when they describe to me one scientific misdemeanor or another, somebody who's faked some data and been caught. I said, right, and who discovered that? Who proved that this was fraudulent? The self-policing of science is what's done it, and the religion has nothing like it. But there's also a touchiness arms race. We heard earlier today from Bona about the blasphemy laws in Bangladesh, the crime of hurting religious feelings. And now we're seeing many people are discovering in this arms race the utility as an offensive or defensive tool of a heightened sensitivity, a heightened religious feelings sensitivity, which then scares off many people who otherwise would be critical. It's this that makes it difficult to find the balance we need when talking about the issues that we've been talking about happily amongst ourselves here at this wonderful convention. There is, moreover, finally, a sort of meta arms race. Doug Hofstadter once said to me, anything you can do, I can do meta. This is sort of the philosopher's theme. To go meta is to talk about something. And you will have noticed how so much of the coverage, for instance, of this election is meta and meta-meta. Instead of talking about the issues, they're talking about the strategies, the counter-strategies, the effectiveness of the strategies, the effectiveness of possible counter-strategies, the probability that a strategy will work. And the hour goes by and nobody said anything about the actual issues. It's all just a game of strategy. Well, now maybe that's not so bad. Maybe it's actually good, but it might be bad. It might distract us from truth-telling. That's what worries me the most. So what do? I'm about to wind up here. I think we've heard from several people what to do. We should do good under the banners of secularism, not just say we're good, but show it. Show, don't just tell. Like the members of FFRF are doing in so many ways, and I want to encourage you to do it again and more. Thanks for your attention. If people want to ask questions, we can move a little bit.
A few minutes of questions.
Okay.
So Dan will be signing copies of his books when he's done, but I think we have time for about 5 minutes of questions. Does anyone want to come up to a mic and ask a question? Or two or three, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. This is a question about recently, I want to talk specifically about criticism of Islam. I find that in the news media these days, it's become very controversial to criticize the ideology of Islam, and that often gets conflated with criticism of the Muslim people themselves. And how can we, as atheists and secular people, make that distinction between the criticism of the ideology of Islam and the so that doesn't get confused with the criticism of the people themselves?
Oh, that is such an important question, and it's really much too big to give a simple answer. I don't know a simple answer to that question, although I will tell you what I think is right, and partly. I think that, let's go back a few years. I think when the Danish cartoons were published, we missed a golden opportunity to publish those everywhere, all over the world. And I know that there were liberal Muslims, good Muslims, nonviolent Muslims who were aching to have us do that, because the furor that broke out over that was not so much directed against us as against them. And we let them down. So I think we do have to be very careful, but we should be absolutely unafraid about calling unacceptable behavior that, and calling it criminal, calling it barbaric when it is, and not be dissuaded by those who claim to have their feelings hurt. But it has been made a very difficult path to follow.
Thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
So one of the things I've been interested in a lot lately, and I've heard kind of brought up a little bit, is people's epistemologies and how they come to truth. And one of the things I'm really interested in doing personally, partly as my effort for helping people who are not atheists, recover from religion, is using street epistemology. And I'm curious how much you know about that and what your thoughts are. And one of the things that makes me think about it in your talk is you talk a little bit about being closed-minded and kind of being offended, being, having this righteous indignation, like you can't offend me. And one of the things I think with street epistemology that's really interesting is you can sort of circumvent that armor of God. You can really get to someone and talk to them about their beliefs, and you can say, why do you believe because of faith? Is this the best method for finding truth? And so I'd just kind of like to get your thoughts and opinions on that.
Well, I think one thing we know that doesn't tend to work well is formal arguments that refute their beliefs. Almost nobody ever is moved by that. And I think, to me, the best way of proceeding is to ask them lots of questions. Politely, persistently, probingly. Ask them questions and see if they can answer them. And don't play gotcha with them. In fact, let them walk away and count on the fact that they're going to be thinking about what they should have said instead. And that's the way people don't change their mind in public, but they do change their minds. Give them a chance to change their minds.
Dr. Dennett, what do you think is the utility of WikiLeaks in service to transparency?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning.
What do you think is the utility of WikiLeaks in the service to transparency?
WikiLeaks, yes. Well, I was at the TED conference where Snowden appeared as a little robot that rolled onto the stage and was remotely, there was an image and picture and sound from somewhere in Moscow or wherever he was arranged. And it was quite an interesting little interview with Snowden at TED. And afterwards, I got in a little debate about that with none other than Bill Gates, who had missed it. He had arrived late. And he said, I think that Snowden should go to prison. And I said, I think Snowden should get the Nobel Prize. And needless to say, he was dubious about that idea. But when I told him that Snowden had revealed that the government had been lying to Microsoft, his face froze. So I think like all of these, I think that hacking is part of this new transparency arms race, and it is both wonderful and pernicious. It's an extremely powerful tool. We've never had anything like it, and we're all going to have to learn how to live with it. I'm sure John Podesta right now is shaking his head about his hacked emails, and I can think of a number of other people who are probably extremely unhappy with the recent revelations. So I think to me, the important thing is to consider the hypothesis. These aren't isolated incidents. This is the new world. And we're going to have to change every institution on the planet to accommodate to this new world.
This kind of goes back to the one question before. We talk a lot about how to talk to people. Now, one of the things we talk a lot about is having religion classes. And one of the things that helped me as I was struggling as a teenager was when we reviewed the book of Matthew in my Great Books class, and we did it in a critical way. The thing I was wondering about is, do you think with the current mindset in the country, and I'm pretty sure this could not happen in my home state of Oklahoma anymore, is it even possible at this point to put comparative religion classes into high schools and have them taught that way, where we don't promote any religion and we don't promote irreligion, but we just look at them the way we would in a college class?
I think it is possible, and I think it is one of the best projects I know. I think I will, if I had $1 billion to spend, I'd put a lot of money into figuring out some way to provide free education for young women and girls in Islamic nations.
And
I would also be willing to put a lot of time and energy and money into providing objective, carefully vetted and confirmed factual information about all the world's religions into the school system and make it just as compulsory as American history is, and for homeschoolers, for everybody. You wonder if it's possible. Look, 10 years ago, would we have thought that the LGBT revolution would be possible within a few years? All it takes is getting out there and making it happen. And you'd be surprised how many allies you'll pick up along the way.
Well, I know in my situation, they did not know. The parents, she'd wanted to teach the Communist Manifesto, and they didn't allow it, so she substituted that. The parents had no idea how she was teaching it. And that's the only reason she got away with it. So this was in Oklahoma, central Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, I'm sure if we do this, and we should, there will be a lot of tales to be told at future meetings of FFRF of heroes and heroines and victories and defeats, but we're going to win in the end. But we just got to get out there and try to make it happen.
Dan, you mentioned exaggerated touchiness as a defense mechanism for indefensible beliefs. Have you given any thought to effective counter strategies?
How to counter that strategy?
Yes.
Humor, I think, is a good strategy. I'll leave it at that. It's interesting that Jerry was talking about how science and religion don't go together at all well. Neither do religion and humor. And it's not an accident. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel Dennett, one of the four horsemen who knows what end of the horse to talk out of. So that's wonderful talk.